formally proceedings because our witness has been waiting so patiently. I declare open this hearing of the Joint Select Committee on Social Media in the Australian Society. I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet and pay for those of us in Canberra, that's the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples, pay respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples present or tuning in today. My name is Sharon Clayton. I am the chair of this committee and I'm joined today by members of the committee that you will get to meet shortly who are participating in person and by video conference. These are public proceedings being audio and video streamed live via the Parliament's website and a Hansard transcript is being made. I remind the witness that in giving evidence to the committee, they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such action may be treated by the Parliament as contempt. It's also contempt to give false or misleading evidence. Witnesses also have a right to request to be heard in camera. If you object to answering a question, you should just state the grounds upon which the objection is made, and the committee will determine whether it will insist on an answer having regard to the ground on which is claimed. If the committee determines to insist on an answer, a witness may request that an answer be given in camera. And I just ask everyone to make sure they switch off their mobile phones or pop them on silent, and for those joining us by video conference or teleconference, but I think we're all on video, I ask that you just mute the connection until it's your turn to speak. And I remind all committee members that as we continue our work in implementing the Set the Standard report as chair, I will ensure that proceedings are conducted in an orderly, respectful and courteous manner. I would now like to very warmly welcome via video conference Mr Leonardo Puglisi, founder and chief anchor of 6 News Australia. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses has been given to you. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. And I, just for the Hansard record now, I will ask if you to give your full name and the capacity in which you appear before the committee today. Then I'll come back to you asking for opening comments or a short opening statement, and then I'll invite all members of the committee to ask questions. So that's just so you know the format. There'll be no surprises there. If you could just, for the record, state your full name and capacity to begin, that would be terrific.
Yeah, my name's Leonardo Puglisi and I'm the founder and chief anchor of 6 News Australia.
Thank you. And I now invite you to make a short opening statement, and at the conclusion of any remarks, members of the committee will ask questions. So over to you, Mr Puglisi.
Yeah, I'll keep this short. Just want to thank the committee for having me here today. Social media is such an important topic in the 21st century, and especially for young people like myself, people around my age, people, you know, getting into their teen years, entering high school, leaving high school. It's really important, and it's critical that in all the discussions we have about it, young people are spoken to, are consulted about it, and made part of the discussion. If we're talking about legislation affecting young people, we want to make sure young people are heard as part of this. And we want to be able to understand our perspectives so that we can all work together to make sure there's better outcomes, there's better safety, there's better use of social media for whatever purpose young people might have on it, whether it's running a news channel or probably something else for most young people. So that's really it. That's, I think, really important, and just, yeah, very happy to be here today.
And we're very happy that you're able to join us, so thank you. I will now just open up to questions from each of the committee members, and either let me know or we could try the raising of the hand technique, but I might go to Mr Mackenzie in the room to go first.
Thank you so much, Chair. So quickly, I'm old, so I'm afraid I do not know much about 6 News. Could you start by describing your model, and particularly the dependence of your news model on social media as a means of finding your audience and keeping up to date with them?
Yeah, well, we're an entirely digital-only news outlet. So our TV, in a sense, is YouTube. That's our main platform for broadcasting. We're live virtually 24/7. And then our other main platforms are Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and TikTok, Twitter especially. But we have an audience from pretty much every age group imaginable on all the main, I guess you could say, 4 platforms, 5 if you include YouTube. In terms of dependence, it's where we've started on YouTube. It's how we continue to grow, right? We don't have a radio slot or a community television slot. It's just been purely 100% digital from the get-go back in 2019. And so, yeah, we completely depend on it. Without social media, without access to social media for a young person like myself, 6 News just plainly wouldn't exist.
And algorithmically, how do you feel the platforms either support or don't support you? Meaning getting it out and about to the right eyeballs for you.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it has been a bit random for us. On TikTok, for instance, some of our videos might get 12 million, some of them might get 1,200. And so in some ways they've been able to support us. It's been a bit random. As you can kind of imagine, TikTok is definitely our youngest audience. It is people my age. Facebook, we're able to get out a lot of content to some of the older people like my parents' age, and that's helped us there. And then Twitter has again been kind of random, but we've gained enough followers there that most people are just seeing it from their following. So it can be a bit random at times, but I think that the more content we push out, the more likely people are going to see it.
And so therefore, as a content producer and a very invested one, you don't feel like you have any insight into the actual operation of the algorithms in relation to your product at this point?
It's just not something, it's not something I've particularly looked into, but I think you can get it on a basic level. We know who our audience is being pushed to. We get those metrics from social media. We can see it on Twitter and YouTube analytics. At times it has been random. There's other larger media companies, much larger than us, that will have their own ways of getting followings. But it's something we're going to continue to look at. We've got a small team and we're working to see how, I guess, the algorithms can be best, I guess, used to make sure as many people find out about us as possible. But it's just not something I've particularly, looked into. I've just focused on trying to get the news out.
And are you able to determine what proportion of your audience is under 18?
Yeah, I'm conscious of the fact that, some young people do change their age on social media, but on YouTube, the last time I checked, I would say it's just under 20%. I'd say around about 15. I haven't specifically checked on TikTok, but based on some of our comment sections and interactions, it would be a much larger proportion, probably in maybe possibly up to the 30s. On Instagram, it'd probably be around 15% as well. Twitter and Facebook, much, much less, closer to 0 for them. But round about YouTube, our main platform, give or take about 15%.
Fascinating. Thank you. That's all from me.
Thanks, Ms McKenzie. And I'm giving the call to Ms Templeman.
Thank you. And Chair, I'm at a little bit of a disadvantage because my iPad has run down so much that I don't have your pictures. So I can't see anybody's faces. So I apologise if I missed some visual clues. But Mr Puglisi, look, as a former journalist, I really commend you on what you're doing to bring news to a wider audience, and we certainly know that the news viewing habits of young people, I'm even much less young than Ms McKenzie, and so I guess I want to ask you about the experiences that, as a young media anchor, your own experiences on, pretty much exclusively digital platforms to reach your audience. Can you talk about, you've talked about some of the reach, but as the anchor, what is your experience of interacting with people on social media, good and bad, or through that medium?
Yeah, it's obviously been mixed. A lot of people who work in journalism get a lot of nasty comments. I think that's not surprising. That's even before social media, right? It happens. A lot of those are quite unhinged, and I try to ignore them. There have been, I think overall it's definitely been positive experiences, right? The amount of support that we have is extraordinary, and I couldn't be prouder of the small team we have at 6 News. And so, yeah, it has been largely positive experiences. As to the negatives, as I said before, right, there's general comments that journalists get that accuse them of lying or things like that. people have the right to, question some of our reporting, not saying they don't. And of course, there's been some more, I guess you could say, targeted comments because of my age. Again, that's not really a surprise, but I try to just really mock those people. It's definitely a vast minority for me, though it has been, really positive. And the amount of support we get for the work we do or anything I do personally as well, even when I said, I'd be at this committee, the amount of support is just, it's great to see. So overall, positive experience, and I see about the 5 years I've really had social media.
And do you have a view on whether the systems and processes that of the social media platforms fuels harm for other journalists? We've certainly taken evidence around what journalists can experience, particularly those diverse or young journalists. Is there anything about that you can see about the systems and processes of the social media platforms that feeds that sort of activity?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. I think in general, the fact that, some platforms aren't good at reporting kind of really hateful comments is a problem in itself. I think Twitter in recent times has been really, really bad in its reporting process for genuinely hateful comments. In terms of whether they're being, fed, again, it depends on, and as I said, I don't look into it too much, the algorithms. Sometimes on, Twitter For You pages, it's being promoted a lot more. But, of course, other times, depending if they use a particular word, it might get hidden. So it's hard to see. Journalists or not journalists, I think, there can be probably more adequate measures for adequate reporting, so something actually comes from it. But in general, I think, that in itself is just a problem. There's not enough adequate reporting processes for genuinely awful stuff. I'm not sure whether it's being particularly promoted via algorithms or processes or not.
Look, I have seen some of your comments around the discussion around limiting access to social media platforms for young people. Can you just share with us your thoughts around that? And, and I know you've acknowledged, or I'm pretty sure I've seen in your comments that, you've understood why the federal government is looking at restricting access to people below a certain age. But can you share with us your thinking around that as a measure and perhaps what some additional measures might be effective?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, I totally understand, why we might need protections in place. There is, I'll repeat it, genuinely harmful content on there. The problem is I don't think the proposed ban, or at least the details we've gotten so far, do actually address it, do actually remove the content. And in all accounts, it seems pretty easy to bypass. I can attest as a teenager that young people do lie about their birth year, and that's not uncommon. Even before social media, there would be teenagers who made fake IDs to buy alcohol or snuck out or did something their parents didn't want to do. It's just a kind of the new age of that, and it is social media. I just don't think banning, we're talking about potentially 15-year-olds from social media is going to be effective. And also what platforms would be taken away. There's been talk that YouTube could be involved in that, which I think would just be ridiculous given how important YouTube is in school for learning, and there's so much content that teachers rely on YouTube, and just for general content, right? It's so widespread, YouTube, that banning it would be pretty ridiculous. I'm not opposed to kind of further measures to stop the existing under 13s, which are already not supposed to be on platforms. I don't think we need a 10-year-old on Twitter or anything like that. So I'm not opposed to potentially looking into ways to make sure that they aren't on there, even though that would again be a pretty small number. But I just don't see how it would be effective. And I can already tell you with, I've got a younger brother who would be affected by the ban. I can tell you he already would have a dozen ways to get around it.
So what do you think the most effective things are, either separately or in addition to that, to be able to reduce the potential for harm caused to young people through social media use?
Yeah, look, I think obviously governments, both federal and state, have to have some consultation with these platforms. I know that obviously Twitter and Facebook haven't had maybe the best relationships with the federal government in recent times. I appreciate that, but clearly consultation's needed there. Also just need some proper education. Now, yes, maybe in like year 5 and 6, we get some patronising seminars that come in and kind of warn us, and it's all kind of, spooky social media. And I think that, again, spurs young people on to see, what are we not seeing? Whereas you can just talk about simple dangers. I think there's also education for parents, which I think is really important. There are so many parents out there who, even by their own admission, are pretty digitally illiterate, and something like that is important. I don't think there is a silver bullet in this situation, but a blanket ban I can see it causing harm, and we don't want to cause any further harm. We want to take measures that are actually important and empower parents to make their own decisions with education in mind and knowing, I guess, ins and outs of social media a bit more than they might currently.
Can I ask you, without going into any details, but over a period of hearings, we've heard from parents who feel that they're a bit powerless to manage their young person's engagement on social media. What thoughts do you have around that circumstance where a parent is feeling no matter what they say or what they do, they can't really control the whether it's addiction or the desire of their young people to spend time on social media, even when everyone knows in a particular circumstance it might not be doing them any good?
Yeah, no, that's obviously a concern. I completely understand why parents can feel that way. Obviously, there is age groups depending. We don't want a little 8-year-old to be addicted to his iPad watching YouTube for ages. We want to make sure that's not in place. And again, you can have measures there. There already are some measures there for teenagers. Look, in some ways, again, there is no silver bullet. You have to consider, of course, that if there is something as serious as addiction, if there's a ban in place, someone who is really addicted to social media will get past that. So again, I'm just not sure how the ban would apply there. But there have to be tools in place. Again, this is something you can have further consultation about. As I said, I don't have all the answers. I'm not sure anyone has the perfect answer at the moment. There is no silver bullet, but it's a completely understandable concern from parents. I just don't see how a blanket ban will necessarily stop that completely. And again, I can see a blanket ban actually causing some harms.
Could you just tell me what harms you think that might be? And I meant to pick up on it earlier when you mentioned it. And this will be my last question.
Yeah, look, I think that if you're taking away social media from someone who uses it for community, a young person, say, 14 or 15 who might be affected by this ban, I don't want to see that. There are plenty of young people out there who might not feel accepted at home for whatever reason. There's others who just might be lonely. I think, during the COVID-19 pandemic, that's happened. I've seen it firsthand with other people at my school, and, making sure that social media might be the only place where they're able to be themselves, or they're able to connect with friends. Again, maybe they've had friends who move overseas or interstate or wherever, or you live in a remote community. One of our reporters at 6 News, Maggie Perry, she lives in a pretty small town in central Queensland, and she's really interested in politics, but there'd be no one like that in her small town, but she's able to connect with other like-minded young people, and she was able to find 6 News through social media. Now she's a valued member of 6 News, and she's been able to do that. And without social media, that wouldn't be possible. So I just don't think we need to take that away from young people who are already on there, and of course parents who, for other reasons, might be very happy for their 14-year-old to have an Instagram or a YouTube account.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Mr Wallace.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much for your appearance, Mr Puglisi. You talked a little bit about the importance of education in relation to social media. What kind of education do you think would be best to alert not just the young people to the dangers of social media, but also their parents and teachers? How do we get that education out there?
I think, well, for starters, for parents, I guess basic education at some level, right? There are so many who, I'll use the term again, are digitally illiterate and don't understand what certain platforms are, even things that for someone like my age would be common knowledge, the difference between Facebook and YouTube, you know, that might be completely confusing for someone who's a bit older. That's a basic thing, and that has to be looked at, especially, you know,
like when they've got kids. You mean?
Yeah, well, when they're getting kids, but for kids, I think something that we've always kind of had, and I touched on it before, but I'll just bring it up. You know, we get these maybe like one a year seminars in, maybe a one-time seminar where we're told, you know, this is all the bad stuff that's on social media, so you should never ever do it. I guess there's no sort of moderate position there. There's no real understanding that, you know, young people, if they want to use social media, they will. And if you take it from a different approach, you talk about, you know, here's social media, here's how you can, you know, make sure you're safe on it, here's how you can use it, here's how to avoid getting scammed. And there are plenty of, in addition to older people, younger people can be hit with scams online too and other harmful content. I think there has to be a bit of an acceptance that young people will use social media. Young people, you know, will have to have some kind of digital life, and you can avoid that harmful content, or you can try to deal with it while still using it. A total blanket ban, again, if you tell a young person, even without social media for years, if you tell a young person don't do this, they're probably more likely to do it.
Would you accept, though, that, you know, I've heard you talking about the fact that kids will find their way around an age verification ban, whether that's at 15 or 18 or whatever it might be. Some young people will find their way around. An analogy that's been drawn is, well, we set road rules. We know that people are going to speed, but we still say, well, on this stretch of road, 60 kilometres an hour is the speed limit. If you go over that speed limit, then you're breaking the rules and you'll be fined if you're caught. But we don't just say, oh, well, we know people are going to speed, therefore we won't have road rules. Do you accept that there's an analogy to be drawn there?
I can see that analogy, but I think there's, you know, other analogies you can bring in about, you know, when there's danger in the water, we don't teach kids to stay out of the water, we teach them to swim, right? We teach them to deal with social media. So I understand that, yes, you know, just because people will get around it doesn't mean we shouldn't put it in. But the reality is the amount of people that would get around it, the amount of young people, if they really want to, would be pretty much a majority, depending on kind of verification you put in or the kind of measures. You know, if it's ticking a box to say I'm over the age of blah, 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 that's pretty easy to get.
No one's talking about, you know, a self-ticking box. No one's talking about that. I mean, that has proven to be totally ineffective in things like being able to access porn online. So I don't think anybody's silly enough to think we should, you know, have a box that says I'm over 18.
No, I would hope not. But even depending on the age verification, you know, whether it would have to apply to all Australian social medias. Look, these are unknowns. These are things in the legislation that'll have to be worked out. I look forward to seeing them worked out over the next few months. But really, I mean, it's something I think young people are pretty smart at getting around. Most parents would probably concede that their kid would know a lot more about the digital space than they do.
Would you, well, in your recommendations, you suggest that messaging apps should be sort of get a carve out if the committee decides to make a recommendation in relation to age verification and the government accepts that recommendation. That troubles me, I have to say. You know, the committee's received quite a bit of evidence from a number of people that the messaging apps, I should say, like TikTok, like Instagram, I shouldn't say TikTok, Instagram, WhatsApp has been used extensively to create a lot of the harms that is being done on and via social media. And yet you're saying that these messaging apps should get a carve out. Can you explain your rationale in that?
I'm not sure exactly by carve out, but I think these messaging apps are important. Instagram isn't just used for messaging, right? It's used for a lot of things. If there is harm from these messaging apps, and as you say, you listed a couple of them, they have to be addressed some way or another. Again, I'm just not sure if there's a silver bullet with the social media ban. But again, we know that young people use plenty of platforms for plenty of different reasons. That's the problem with kind of a blanket rule.
But sorry, so I may have misunderstood your submissions, but I thought that you were looking for, if we went down the road of age verification reforms, that messaging apps like WhatsApp, Messenger, iMessage and Discord should be excluded.
I'm really not sure if I made that submission. I'm not saying that they should be
Mr.
excluded.
Wallace,
I don't think I said that.
Sorry, can I just intervene here? I don't believe the witness has provided us with a submission, so I'm not sure what you're reading from, Mr. Wallace.
Yeah, wasn't it?
Anyway, by all means...
I thought it was submission 60, but I might be wrong there.
Yeah, I think you may be. So, I mean, by all means ask questions, but I don't think Mr. Puglisi has submitted any submission.
Okay. So you haven't put any submissions in, Mr. Puglisi?
No, I don't think I have.
Right. No. Well, my apologies. I beg your pardon. So, let me ask you, do you think that that messaging apps should be excluded from any age verification reforms?
Again, given how broad messaging apps are, I don't think they should necessarily be excluded. There is harmful content on all of these platforms. I can't see the logic behind not including Instagram and Discord if the federal government is to go ahead with it. The only thing I think should definitely be excluded if something does go ahead is YouTube. I just think banning that would be a pretty ridiculous step and a step too far.
Okay. I thank you for that. I take your point about the importance of government and the parliament engaging with young people. How would you, apart from things like this, you giving evidence to the committee, how would you like to be engaged as a representative of young people? How would you think that young people should be inform the process more for us as legislators?
Well, I'm conscious of the fact it might be banned for them, but I think through social media is pretty important. That is where most young people are getting their information, they're getting their news, they're finding out about things like this. They're finding out about the fact that there is a committee talking about issues like this. So just reaching out to young people where young people are, I think is really important. You're not going to be able to, ask for submissions with an AM radio ad if you're looking for hearing from young people. I think that's important from all stakeholders, parents, mental health groups, teachers, young people. I think it's all really important to listen to. And I'm really glad we're having this discussion.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Wallace. I'm going to Ms. Daniel.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for being here, Mr. Puglisi. What do you think the impact would be on young people if they were restricted from social media until, say, age 16 and then suddenly the gate opened? How would they handle that space that they've never before entered?
Well, if someone who is 15 turning 16 hasn't bypass the ban, which is a 50-50 kind of thing. I think that in some ways there would be a lot of unknowns that you'd have to tackle. I would hope in that situation that a 15-year-old, and what year level would that be, year 9, year 10, would have had some kind of in-school education about it right before, I guess, they reach that age group. We don't want the only education young people get on social media to be, at the age of 11 and 12, and then you just stop there at the end of primary school. So I guess in some ways they'd be tackling it for the first time and maybe just not as adapted to it as you'd hope. I think anyone who, most people my age, I reckon, at least in my school, would have turned 13 and gotten social media around that age, by now I think most would be pretty adept with it. But if we were waiting another, 3-4 years, I think there'd just be a lot of, not knowing how to deal with a lot of things. And I also just quickly add that whether we like it or not, social media is part of people's daily lives now. People use it for work. People maybe use it as their only means of communication. And I don't think that can be ignored, that it is a critical part of daily lives. I'm not talking to my schoolmates through iMessage or anything like that.
So if I wanted to meet up with a friend this afternoon after this hearing, I would probably send them a text message saying, I'll see you down at the beach at 6 o'clock. How would someone of your age communicate that?
Probably just I'd send them a message on Instagram, or I think other people might use Discord. I don't really use it, but yeah, message on Instagram.
So do you think if that didn't exist, and if we went back to the sort of analogue phone vibes, that people would, of your cohort and a teenage cohort, would revert to picking up the phone and making a phone call or texting?
Look, if there is a really serious ban in place, yeah, we'd be happy to use a text message. I mean, I don't think many people in Gen Z call on the phone anymore, to be honest. But yeah, we'd just use your standard text message. I think that, it's most people, or at least, a lot of people would have their mates' numbers. But again, that's something that would have to be adapted if the kind of ban legislation got through.
So it's a culture change, really. I just want to go to the importance of news for young people, given the work that you do. How important do you think it is that young people access news? And we know from a lot of the evidence that we've heard on this committee that the vast majority of young people are accessing news by social media. How do you think that benefits us as a society to have young people accessing that information?
Well, it's important because, teenagers are part of society. They deserve to be informed. And the reality is most of them use social media. They don't have nightly appointment viewing it for the 6 o'clock news anymore. And I think it's important for them to be informed so they are, as up to date on major issues as people who might be a couple of years older than them, right? We don't want to, stop a 15-year-old from seeing any news, but a 17-year-old is allowed to be fully informed. Some of these 15-year-olds might be in workplaces when they could be banned by it. So just on the news point, it's really important for them to be able to, get knowledge about this, know what's going on in daily lives. I think everyone, deserves to be able to see that on a platform where they're using it. You can say, just turn on the TV and you'll see it. People just don't do that. Young people just don't do that. And that has to, again, like social media being part of daily lives, I think that has to be accepted as well.
So from that point of view, do you have a view on the News Media Bargaining Code element of this inquiry and the potential for Meta to remove news from platforms? And if that was to happen, how would that affect an organisation like yours?
Yeah, I've only looked at it a bit. I do remember when it was taken off briefly for a week in 2021. For 6 News, it'd be affected, on for instance, on Facebook, right? We've got a smaller following than other platforms, but it's mainly our older audience on there. On Instagram, that'd be taking off, quite a few thousand people, and it would stop them seeing it. I think the first thing I see, and a lot of my mates, I imagine, would also see when they open social media, open Instagram, is a post from a news organisation. It might be a day old, it might be a pretty random story, but it still is a post from a news organisation. Now, yes, if it's off Meta-owned platforms, they'll get it through other ways. TikTok is where a lot of news outlets have been building in recent times. YouTube, of course, is somewhere where you'll see a lot of news. But again, really, so many people just get it from Instagram. They get it from seeing it on an Instagram story as they tap through. That might be the only news they see for the day, but it still is really important for them to see. And even just outside of that, we're talking about giving them basic political information, civics classes before they go to vote, and a lot of their information on politics is coming from social media. I think it's important for them to be able to access that, to access, political news and to understand what's going on.
So one of the conversations that we had with the Daily Oz, for example, was that if they were forced off Instagram, that they're trying to push people down a sort of newsletter path where they would receive a daily newsletter by email on a subscription. Do you think that the younger cohort, because yours would be younger than the Daily Oz, would adapt to that kind of approach?
Well, they might. It's a bit of uncharted waters for people my age, 13 to 18. I can probably attest to Ken, a lot of us don't check our emails quite that regularly, or maybe as much as we should. I think it's still video content is where people get their information from. Now, a lot of that is Instagram Reels, a lot of it is now TikTok, and of course, it always has been YouTube. And so taking away Instagram, I think a lot of them would probably just migrate to TikTok and YouTube to see that kind of content if they're not on there already. And to be honest, most young people are probably on at least 2 social media platforms, so they might probably be on there anyway.
Yep, and just one more really quick one, Chair. I know we're out of time, but just on the analogies, Mr. Wallace talking about, driving and alcohol restrictions, and you made the point about learning how to swim. And I guess the secondary part of that analogy is swimming between the flags. If you were put in place some guardrails, one of the things that's been brought up in the inquiry is whether you could have sort of, I don't know what to call it, kids' internet, but, a sort of a limited space that is made safe for younger people, where they could access verified news sources, for example, safe content and such. Is there anything in that, do you think?
I'd be happy to see that explored, but I'd want to make sure that it's near perfect in terms of making sure it's safe for kids, right? You don't want to have adults going on there and lying about their age, and we want to make sure that is safe. Again, it's a proposal that I'd be happy to look into. I remember a couple of years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago, when there was the big kind of copper drama on YouTube, and they had to make these YouTube Kids, and then they had to change certain YouTube videos so that they were made for kids or made not for kids, which I remember dealing with at the time with 6 News content, because you see young people and it's technically made not for kids. But yeah, I'd be happy to see that explored. I want to make sure it's as foolproof as possible, though, but definitely an idea that could be looked at.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I know we are over time. I would like to just ask one question before I have to close proceedings, because I know a little bit about your story and how you founded 6 News. I'm interested to know what you think would be the impact on 6 News if there were age restrictions around social media. What do you think would happen to a project like yours?
Well, it would make it really hard for us to work in many ways. Some of our members of our team are under 16 at the moment, so I'm just over 16, but some would currently be affected. Our political editor, Roman McKinnon, our deputy news editor, Austin Pollock. I mentioned Maggie Perry before, who does some great work in politics for us, and that'll be taken off. And the way we communicate is through Twitter messages, right? We don't really text that much. So that'd impact us a lot. Take away, I think I mentioned before at the top on YouTube, maybe about 15% of our audience, a lot more on platforms like TikTok. But, it would harm us in that regard. And so, again, even if it's just not about 6 News, but that's just the problem with a blanket ban. You have a good amount of young people who are on there for good purposes, who have good experiences on there, who are able to connect on there. I don't want that to be taken away. So it wouldn't force me off. I wouldn't be going anywhere, but it would take away quite a number of our pretty valued team. Our Roman McKinnon, for instance, he was 13 when he interviewed the now Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, and he'd be taken off it now. So yeah.
Do you think the platforms could do more to ensure a kind of safe place for young people to thrive in, whether it's in investigative journalism or the arts or a whole lot of, media industry ventures online?
Yeah, undoubtedly. I think as a blanket stance, platforms could do a lot more for young people and helping them to stay safe, helping them to thrive. Again, don't have all the solutions for that there, but that's something that, would have to be looked at. Clearly, there's a lot of unsafe experiences for everyone on social media. I think I mentioned it before, plenty of reporting processes aren't effective at all. And so I think there are ways to help young people grow on social media and to help them, explore and to do that in a safe way, whether that's through a kids' internet, as was mentioned before, or any other means. I think that's something that can be looked at. But just as a blanket thing, platforms can do a lot more for young people and a lot more for safety in general. I think most people or everyone would be in agreement on that.
What would you, I've heard your evidence about why you think an age restriction wouldn't work, and I accept your evidence. We've taken a lot of evidence also from parents who have been subject to profound grief, all right? There have been some very serious harms that have, and they have lost their children, the light of their life, So I'm just wondering they are very worried about they feel very disempowered right now and are really at wit's ends for some people about how to kind of manage. They're not digital natives, they don't really, they haven't grown up as you have in this space, but I'm just wondering what you make of that sort of disconnect in a way. There's some very, very polarised experiences and opinions around, depending on life experiences, I guess. What do you say to that opposite side of the argument? You're a journalist, so you get used to this pitting, different points of views. What would you say to those people who are really seeking some kind of safeguards, safe rails, want to kind of protect children? That's their instinctive as a parent. So what's your message to those people?
Yeah, I would just say, I completely understand. In many ways, I completely agree that there needs to be better, guardrails and safety for young people online, right? I don't think anyone would say it's perfect at the moment or even adequate at the moment. And so, I can, again, completely understand why people will feel disempowered. They haven't grown up with it. They can't grow up with it, right? That's past. Young people are growing up with it. And so whether it's through mediums like Better Education, other platforms, better consultation, again, there's no silver bullet. A parent would know their kid best as for whether social media is good for them or not. And so, I think that's really important. But I completely understand why they're feeling disempowered. I completely understand. And I think everyone's pretty much in agreement that there needs to be some better situation for young people online. I'm just not sure a blanket ban's the answer for that. And as I mentioned before, I can see it causing harms for young people who do use it for good purposes and have no real reason to just be suddenly stripped of it.
Thank you so much for spending time with us this afternoon. I know your life's pretty busy, actually, from what I see. So it's important that we get to talk to as many people in our deliberations around these laws, and you've been able to really cross a couple of bridges around your experience as a journalist, but also as, a digital native. So thank you very much for that. I guess that will conclude today's hearing. And just on behalf of the committee, again, thank you, Mr Puglisi, for your evidence today. I don't believe you've taken questions on notice, but if there are any that come up from committee members, the request is that we get a response back by, or the Secretariat rather, gets that response back by Wednesday, the 16th of October. So we're trying not to pile on additional homework for you, but that's the committee's ask, should there be any other questions on notice. And on that note, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you again.